The morning sun painted the palace walls golden as Prince Alexander walked through the grand corridors of Kensington Palace. At just 16 years old, he had grown tired of the endless tutoring sessions and formal ceremonies that filled his days. His father, King Edward, believed in strict discipline and proper royal education, but Alexander often felt suffocated by the rigid schedule. On this particular Tuesday morning, Alexander decided to take a different route to his history lesson. Instead of using the main hallway where servants and officials usually bustled about, he chose the quieter service corridors that ran behind the kitchen areas. These passages were normally used by staff members who preferred to move around the palace without disturbing the royal family. As he walked through the narrow stone corridor, Alexander heard an unusual sound. It was a soft whimpering, almost like someone trying not to cry. The sound was coming from around the corner, near the storage rooms where palace supplies were kept. Alexander paused, his curiosity getting the better of him. In all his years living in the palace, he had never heard such a sound in these usually quiet areas. He carefully moved closer to investigate, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet that lined even these service areas. The whimpering grew clearer, and Alexander could tell it was definitely someone in distress. His heart began to beat faster as he wondered what could be wrong. Was someone hurt? Was there an emergency that needed immediate attention? When Alexander reached the corner, he carefully peeked around the stone pillar. What he saw made his chest tighten with surprise and concern. Sitting on the floor against the wall was James Morrison, one of the younger royal guards. James was supposed to be on duty, standing tall and proud in his red uniform, but instead he was hunched over with his head in his hands. James was 22 years old and had been working as a royal guard for only 8 months. Alexander recognized him because James was often assigned to patrol the areas where Alexander spent most of his time. Unlike the older guards who maintained strict formality, James had occasionally offered a friendly nod or smile when no one was looking. Now, seeing James in such obvious distress, Alexander felt a strange mix of emotions. He had never seen a royal guard show any weakness or vulnerability. They were always so strong, so composed, so perfectly disciplined. But here was James, clearly struggling with something that had brought him to tears. Alexander noticed that James was holding a piece of paper in his trembling hands. The paper looked official, with the royal seal visible even from Alexander's position. James kept staring at the document, then covering his face with his free hand. His shoulders shook slightly, suggesting he was trying very hard to control his emotions. The young prince found himself in an unusual situation. According to royal protocol, he should probably pretend he had not seen anything and continue on his way to his lesson. Royal family members were taught to maintain appropriate distance from palace staff, and getting involved in a guard's personal matters would certainly be frowned upon by his father and the palace officials. But Alexander could not simply walk away. Something about James's distress touched him deeply. Perhaps it was because they were closer in age than most of the other palace staff, or perhaps it was because Alexander himself often felt overwhelmed by the pressures of royal life. Whatever the reason, he felt compelled to help. Alexander took a deep breath and made a decision that would change both their lives. Instead of continuing to his history lesson, he quietly approached James. He cleared his throat softly to announce his presence, not wanting to startle the young guard. James immediately looked up, his eyes wide with shock and embarrassment. He quickly scrambled to his feet, trying to wipe away the tears and compose himself. His face turned red as he realized that Prince Alexander had witnessed his moment of weakness. "Your Royal Highness," James stammered, attempting to stand at attention despite his obvious emotional state. "I apologize. I should not be here. I should be at my post." Alexander held up his hand gently, signaling for James to relax. "Please do not worry about protocol right now," he said in a calm, reassuring voice. "I can see that something is troubling you. What has happened?" James looked confused and uncertain. He had never had a personal conversation with any member of the royal family, and he was not sure how to respond. The piece of paper in his hand seemed to weigh heavily, and he glanced at it nervously. I received some difficult news, Your Highness," James said quietly. "But I should not burden you with my problems. It is not appropriate." Alexander stepped closer, his expression showing genuine concern. "James, is it not? I have seen you around the palace many times. You have always been professional and kind. If you are struggling with something, I would like to help if I can." The kindness in Alexander's voice seemed to break down James's remaining composure. Fresh tears began to form in his eyes as he looked at the young prince who was showing him such unexpected compassion. James looked at the official letter in his hands, his fingers trembling as he tried to find the words to explain his situation. Prince Alexander waited patiently, his young face showing a maturity and understanding that surprised the guard. The corridor around them remained quiet, giving them privacy for this unexpected conversation. "Your Highness," James began slowly, "this letter is from the hospital where my younger sister Emma is being treated. She is only 14 years old and she has been battling leukemia for the past 2 years." His voice cracked as he spoke about his sister, and Alexander could see the deep love and concern in the young guard's eyes. Alexander felt his heart sink as he listened. He had heard about leukemia from his medical studies, and he knew it was a serious illness that required expensive treatment. He remained silent, encouraging James to continue sharing his burden. "Emma has been responding well to treatment," James continued, "but now the doctors say she needs a bone marrow transplant. The problem is that I am the only family member who is a compatible donor match." James paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "The doctors want to schedule the procedure as soon as possible, but it requires me to take several weeks off work for the donation process and recovery." Alexander began to understand the full scope of James's dilemma. As a royal guard, James had a demanding job with strict attendance requirements. Taking extended time off, especially as a newer employee, could jeopardize his position. Without his job, James would lose not only his income, but also the health insurance benefits that were helping to pay for his sister's expensive medical treatments. "I submitted a request for medical leave," James explained, holding up the letter. "But this is the response from the Palace Administration Office. They are saying that as a probationary employee, I am not eligible for extended medical leave. They are offering me only 3 days of personal time, which is nowhere near enough for what Emma needs." The young prince felt a surge of anger at the unfairness of the situation. Here was a dedicated employee facing an impossible choice between saving his sister's life and keeping his job. Alexander knew that the palace had strict policies, but surely there had to be exceptions for situations like this. "What will happen if you cannot take the time off?" Alexander asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. James's shoulders sagged as he responded. "The doctors say that without the transplant, Emma's condition will continue to deteriorate. They have given her maybe 6 months if she does not receive the bone marrow donation. But if I lose my job by taking unauthorized leave, I will not be able to afford her ongoing medical care even if the transplant is successful." Alexander felt overwhelmed by the weight of James's situation. At 16, he had been sheltered from many of life's harsh realities, but seeing James's genuine anguish opened his eyes to struggles he had never imagined. The young prince realized that while he worried about his tutoring sessions and formal events, James was facing a life-and-death situation with his beloved sister. "Have you spoken to anyone else about this?" Alexander asked. "Perhaps there is someone in the administration who might reconsider the decision." James shook his head sadly. "I tried speaking to Captain Williams, the head of palace security, but he said his hands are tied by policy. He suggested I might be able to find another job after Emma's treatment. But finding new employment with health benefits that would cover her ongoing care seems almost impossible." Alexander's mind began racing as he considered the options. He knew that his father, King Edward, had the authority to override any palace policy, but approaching the king directly seemed daunting. His father was known for his strict adherence to rules and protocols, and Alexander was not sure how receptive he would be to intervening in a staff member's personal matter. However, Alexander also knew that his father, despite his stern exterior, had a compassionate heart. King Edward had established several charitable foundations focused on helping families with medical crises. Perhaps if the situation were presented properly, the king might be willing to make an exception. "James," Alexander said thoughtfully, "I want to help you and Emma, but I need to understand exactly what type of assistance would solve this problem. What would be the ideal outcome from your perspective?" James looked surprised that the prince was taking such an active interest in finding a solution. "Honestly, Your Highness, I just need permission to take the necessary time off without losing my job or my health insurance. The medical leave does not even need to be paid, as long as I can return to work afterward and Emma's medical coverage continues." Alexander nodded, already formulating a plan in his mind. He knew that approaching this situation correctly would be crucial. He needed to present James's case in a way that would appeal to his father's sense of justice and compassion, while also demonstrating that helping James align with royal values. "James, I want you to know that you are not alone in this situation," Alexander said firmly. "Emma's life is important, and no one should have to choose between saving a family member and keeping their livelihood. Give me some time to think about how best to approach this." James looked at Alexander with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Your Highness, I cannot ask you to get involved in my problems. You have your own responsibilities and duties." Alexander shook his head. "Sometimes our most important duty is to help others when they need it most. Emma needs that bone marrow transplant, and you need support to make it happen. I may be young, but I am not powerless." The determination in Alexander's voice surprised even himself. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had found something truly meaningful to focus on, something beyond the endless royal obligations that had always felt somewhat hollow to him. Alexander spent the rest of that day thinking carefully about how to approach his father about James's situation. He skipped his afternoon riding lesson and instead went to his private study, where he began researching everything he could about bone marrow transplants, medical leave policies, and the legal protections for employees facing family medical emergencies. What Alexander discovered during his research both educated and frustrated him. In many countries, employees had legal rights to take medical leave for family emergencies without losing their jobs. However, palace employment operated under different rules, with policies that dated back decades and had rarely been updated to reflect modern workplace protections. Alexander also learned more about leukemia and bone marrow transplants. He read about the critical timing involved in such procedures and how delays could significantly reduce the chances of successful treatment. Emma's situation was indeed urgent, and every day that passed without the transplant decreased her odds of survival. That evening, Alexander made a decision that would require considerable courage. He requested a private meeting with his father after dinner, something he rarely did unless absolutely necessary. King Edward was surprised by the request, but agreed to meet with his son in the royal library, a quiet space where they could speak without interruption. When Alexander entered the library, he found his father sitting in one of the large leather chairs, reading through official documents by lamplight. King Edward looked up as his son approached, noting the serious expression on the young prince's face. "You wanted to speak with me, Alexander?" King Edward said, setting aside his papers. "You seem quite serious this evening." Alexander took a deep breath and sat in the chair across from his father. "Father, I need to discuss a matter that I believe requires your immediate attention and compassion. It involves one of our palace guards in a life-or-death situation with his sister." King Edward raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his son's earnest tone. "Go on." Alexander proceeded to tell his father everything he had learned about James and Emma's situation. He spoke passionately about the impossible choice James was facing and the urgent need for the bone marrow transplant. Alexander was careful to present the facts clearly and to emphasize the moral implications of the palace's current policy. "This young man has served our family faithfully," Alexander explained. "He is asking for nothing more than the opportunity to save his sister's life without losing everything he has worked for. Surely our values as a royal family include supporting those who serve us when they face genuine emergencies." King Edward listened carefully to his son's presentation, occasionally asking clarifying questions about the medical timeline and the specific policy restrictions James was facing. Alexander could see that his father was genuinely considering the situation, which gave him hope. "You have clearly put considerable thought into this matter," King Edward observed, "but you must understand that making exceptions to established policies can create complications. If we bend the rules for one employee, others may expect similar treatment for less urgent situations." Alexander had anticipated this concern and was prepared with a response. "Father, I have been thinking about that as well. Perhaps this situation could serve as an opportunity to review and update our employment policies to be more compassionate and fair. We could establish clear guidelines for medical emergencies that would apply to all employees equally." The king looked surprised by his son's suggestion, He had not expected Alexander to think so strategically about policy implications. You are proposing that we use this case to create a broader reform of our employment practices? Exactly, Alexander replied. We could establish a medical emergency leave policy that provides job protection and continued health benefits for employees facing serious family health crises. This would not only help James and Emma immediately, but also demonstrate our commitment to being a progressive and caring employer. King Edward stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the palace grounds as he considered his son's proposal. Alexander waited nervously, knowing that his father's decision would determine whether Emma would receive the treatment she desperately needed. Tell me more about this young guard, King Edward said finally. What kind of employee has he been? What do his supervisors say about his work performance? Alexander realized he needed more information to answer these questions properly. Father, would you allow me to gather that information and present a complete report to you tomorrow? I want to ensure that you have all the facts you need to make an informed decision. The king turned back to face his son, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You are asking me to trust you to conduct a proper investigation into this matter? Yes, sir. I believe that if you review James's employment record and speak with his supervisors, you will find that he is exactly the kind of dedicated employee we want to support and retain. King Edward nodded slowly. Very well. You have 24 hours to prepare a comprehensive report on this situation. Include the guard's employment history, supervisor evaluations, the medical details of his sister's condition, and a specific proposal for how we might address both the immediate crisis and the broader policy issues you have raised. Alexander felt a surge of excitement and determination. His father was giving him a real opportunity to make a difference in James and Emma's lives. Thank you, Father. I will not disappoint you. As Alexander prepared to leave the library, King Edward called out to him. Alexander, I am impressed by your compassion and your thoughtful approach to this problem. Regardless of what decision I ultimately make about the guard's situation, you have shown me that you are developing into the kind of leader who cares about the welfare of others. Alexander felt a warm glow of pride at his father's words, but he also felt the weight of responsibility. James and Emma were counting on him, even though James did not yet know about Alexander's efforts on his behalf. The young prince knew he had to succeed in convincing his father to help, because failure would mean watching Emma's condition deteriorate while James faced an impossible choice. Alexander barely slept that night, his mind racing with plans for the comprehensive report his father had requested. Early the next morning, he began his investigation by speaking with Captain Williams, the head of palace security who supervised all the royal guards. Captain Williams was initially surprised when Prince Alexander requested a formal meeting to discuss James Morrison's employment record. However, once Alexander explained the serious nature of the inquiry, the captain became very cooperative and professional. James Morrison is one of our most reliable guards, Captain Williams reported as he reviewed James's file. In his 8 months of service, he has never been late, never missed a shift without proper notice, and has received excellent evaluations from all supervising officers. He is respectful, alert, and takes his duties very seriously. Alexander asked Captain Williams to provide specific examples of James's dedication to his job. The captain shared several instances where James had volunteered for extra shifts when other guards were ill, and how he had once stayed 4 hours past his scheduled time when a security situation required additional personnel. Frankly, Your Highness, Captain Williams added, I was disappointed when the administration denied his request for medical leave. James explained his sister's situation to me personally, and I believe his request was legitimate and urgent. Unfortunately, the employment policies are very strict for probationary employees. Alexander then visited the palace medical officer, Dr. Sarah Chen, to better understand the medical aspects of Emma's condition. Dr. Chen was able to provide Alexander with detailed information about leukemia treatment and bone marrow transplants, confirming everything James had explained about the urgency of the situation. Time is absolutely critical in cases like this, Dr. Chen explained. When doctors identify a compatible bone marrow donor, especially within the patient's family, the transplant should be scheduled as quickly as possible. Every week of delay reduces the likelihood of a successful outcome. Dr. Chen also explained the donor process, which would require James to undergo several medical procedures over a period of 2 to 3 weeks. followed by a recovery period of another 2 weeks. During this time, James would be physically unable to perform his duties as a royal guard. Armed with this medical information, Alexander next visited Emma at the children's hospital where she was receiving treatment. He asked James to meet him there, explaining that he wanted to understand the full situation before presenting anything to his father. James was nervous about bringing Prince Alexander to the hospital, but he was deeply touched by the prince's genuine interest in helping his family. When they arrived at Emma's room, Alexander was struck by how young and fragile she appeared, yet her spirit seemed incredibly strong. Emma was delighted to meet Prince Alexander, though she was too weak to sit up for very long. Despite her illness, she maintained a positive attitude and spoke enthusiastically about her dreams of becoming a teacher. When she recovered, Alexander was impressed by her courage and determination, which reminded him of James's own strength in facing this difficult situation. "Emma, your brother has told me about your treatment," Alexander said gently. "I want you to know that many people are working to make sure you get the help you need." Emma smiled weakly. "James has always taken care of me since our parents died 3 years ago. He works so hard at the palace and he worries about me constantly. I just want him to know that whatever happens, I am proud of him." Alexander felt tears forming in his eyes as he listened to Emma's words. This 14-year-old girl was facing a life-threatening illness with remarkable grace, while her brother was sacrificing everything to try to save her. The injustice of their situation motivated Alexander even more to find a solution. After leaving the hospital, Alexander spent several hours drafting his report for his father. He included James's excellent employment record, detailed medical information about Emma's condition, testimonials from Captain Williams and other supervisors, and a carefully researched proposal for new medical emergency leave policies. Alexander also included a financial analysis showing that the cost of providing extended medical leave for rare emergency situations would be minimal compared to the palace's overall budget, while the benefits in terms of employee loyalty and public relations would be substantial. The most challenging part of the report was the policy proposal section. Alexander researched employment laws from various countries and consulted with the palace legal team to draft a comprehensive medical emergency leave policy that would be fair, practical, and legally sound. The proposed policy would allow employees to take up to 6 weeks of unpaid leave for serious family medical emergencies, with job protection and continued health insurance coverage. The policy would require medical documentation and would apply only to genuine emergencies involving immediate family members. That evening, Alexander presented his 20-page report to his father in the same library where they had met the previous night. King Edward was impressed by the thoroughness and professionalism of Alexander's investigation. "You have clearly put enormous effort into understanding this situation from every angle," King Edward observed as he reviewed the report. "Your proposal for policy reform is particularly well-researched and thoughtful." Alexander waited anxiously as his father read through the entire document. King Edward asked several detailed questions about the financial implications and the legal aspects of the proposed policy changes. "Father," Alexander said when his father finished reading, "I believe this situation represents an opportunity for our family to demonstrate that we truly care about the people who serve us. James has given his best effort to his job, and now he needs our support to save his sister's life." King Edward set down the report and looked directly at his son. "Alexander, you have presented a compelling case and you have shown remarkable maturity in how you have approached this challenge. I am prepared to make a decision that I believe will serve both justice and compassion." King Edward stood up from his chair and walked to his desk, where he picked up his official pen and letterhead. Alexander watched with growing anticipation as his father began to write what appeared to be an official document. "Alexander," King Edward said as he wrote, "I have decided to grant James Morrison immediate emergency medical leave for a period of 6 weeks, with full job protection and continued health benefits. Furthermore, I am implementing your proposed medical emergency leave policy for all palace employees, effective immediately." Alexander felt a wave of relief and joy wash over him. His father had not only agreed to help James and Emma, but had also embraced the broader policy reform that would help other employees in similar situations in the future. "However," King Edward continued, looking up from his writing, "I want you to understand that this decision comes with expectations. You have demonstrated that you can research complex issues and develop thoughtful solutions. I want you to take personal responsibility for ensuring that this new policy is implemented fairly and effectively." Alexander nodded eagerly. "I would be honored to oversee the implementation, Father." "What exactly would that involve?" King Edward handed Alexander the official letter granting James's medical leave. "First, you will personally deliver this letter to James Morrison and ensure that he understands the terms of his leave. Second, you will work with the palace administration to establish the procedures for implementing the new medical emergency leave policy. Third, you will serve as the point of contact for any employee who needs to request emergency leave in the future." Alexander was somewhat surprised by the scope of responsibility his father was assigning to him, but he felt ready for the challenge. "I understand, Father. I will take these responsibilities very seriously." "I know you will," King Edward replied, "but there is one more thing I want you to do. I want you to visit Emma Morrison personally and assure her that her brother's job is secure and that she can focus entirely on her recovery without worrying about their financial situation." Alexander felt touched by his father's thoughtfulness in considering Emma's emotional well-being as well as the practical aspects of the situation. "Thank you, Father. Emma will be so relieved to hear this news." The next morning, Alexander found James at his usual guard post near the main entrance to the palace. James looked tired and stressed, clearly still worrying about his impossible situation. When he saw Prince Alexander approaching, James straightened to attention, trying to hide his emotional distress. "James," Alexander said with a warm smile, "I have some news that I think you will want to hear privately. Could you join me in the small conference room near Captain Williams' office?" James looked confused but followed Alexander to the private room. Once they were alone, Alexander handed James the official letter from King Edward. "Please, read this carefully," Alexander said, barely able to contain his excitement. James opened the letter with trembling hands and began to read. As his eyes moved across the page, his expression changed from confusion to disbelief to overwhelming joy. The letter officially granted him 6 weeks of emergency medical leave with full job protection and continued health benefits. "Your Royal Highness," James stammered, "I do not understand. How is this possible? Yesterday I was told that no exceptions could be made to the policy." Alexander explained how he had investigated James's situation, prepared a comprehensive report for his father, and proposed new policies that would help all palace employees facing similar emergencies. James listened in amazement as Alexander described the effort that had gone into securing this outcome. "You did all of this for me and Emma?" James asked, his voice filled with emotion. "But why? You barely know us." Alexander considered the question thoughtfully. "James, when I saw you struggling in that corridor, I realized that your pain was real and your situation was urgent. Emma's life depends on your ability to help her, and no one should have to choose between saving a family member and keeping their job." It was the right thing to do. James was overcome with gratitude and relief. For the first time in weeks, he felt hope that everything might work out for Emma. "Your Highness, I do not know how to thank you. You have saved my sister's life." "The doctors will save Emma's life," Alexander corrected gently. "I just helped remove the obstacles that were preventing you from helping her. Now you need to contact the hospital immediately and schedule the bone marrow donation procedure." James nodded eagerly. "I will call them as soon as I finish my shift today." "Actually," Alexander said with a smile, "your medical leave begins immediately. Captain Williams has already arranged for another guard to cover your duties. You should go to the hospital right now and begin the process." That afternoon, Alexander accompanied James to the hospital to deliver the good news to Emma personally. When they entered her room, Emma was sleeping, but she woke up when she heard their voices. "Emma," James said, his voice filled with excitement and relief. "I have wonderful news. Prince Alexander has arranged for me to take the time off I need for your bone marrow donation. We can schedule the transplant procedure immediately." Emma looked at Prince Alexander with wide eyes, hardly believing what she was hearing. "Is this really true?" she asked weakly. Alexander sat down beside her bed and took her hand gently. "It is absolutely true, Emma. Your brother can take all the time he needs to help you get better, and his job will be waiting for him when you are both ready. You do not need to worry about anything except getting stronger." Emma began to cry, but these were tears of joy and relief rather than fear and desperation. "Thank you," she whispered to Alexander. "Thank you for helping my brother help me." Alexander felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose that he had never experienced before. Seeing the hope return to Emma's eyes and the relief on James's face made all of his efforts worthwhile. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had used his position as a prince to make a real difference in someone's life. "Emma," Alexander said softly, "I want you to focus all of your energy on getting well. James will be here with you every step of the way, and many people are hoping for your recovery." As they prepared to leave the hospital so that James could begin the medical procedures required for the bone marrow donation, Emma called out to Prince Alexander one more time. "Your Highness," she said, "when I become a teacher someday, I will tell all my students about the kind prince who helped save my life. I will teach them that even important people should care about others and help when they can." Alexander felt his eyes fill with tears at Emma's words. Her simple but profound statement captured exactly what he hoped to accomplish with his life and his role as a prince. Over the following weeks, Alexander remained closely involved in James and Emma's journey. The bone marrow donation procedure went smoothly, with James proving to be an excellent donor match. The medical team was optimistic about Emma's chances of recovery, though they warned that the full process would take several months. During James's recovery period after the donation, Alexander visited the hospital regularly. He was amazed by the strength both siblings showed throughout the challenging treatment process. James never complained about the discomfort from the donation procedure, and Emma faced each day of treatment with remarkable courage. Alexander also used this time to work with the palace administration to implement the new medical emergency leave policy. He discovered that creating fair and effective policies required careful attention to detail and extensive consultation with various departments. Working with the Human Resources Department, Alexander helped develop clear guidelines for what constituted a medical emergency, what documentation would be required, and how the policy would be administered fairly. He also established a review process to ensure that decisions about emergency leave requests would be made quickly and compassionately. Word of the new policy spread throughout the palace staff, and Alexander was surprised by how many employees approached him to express their gratitude. Several staff members shared stories of past situations where they had faced similar dilemmas, and they appreciated knowing that future medical emergencies would not threaten their job. Security Captain Williams told Alexander that the new policy had already improved morale among the palace security staff. "The guards know that their employer cares about their welfare," Captain Williams explained. "This makes them feel more valued and more committed to their work." 1 month after the bone marrow transplant, Emma's doctors delivered encouraging news. Her body was accepting the donated bone marrow successfully, and her blood counts were improving steadily. While she still had a long recovery ahead, the medical team was optimistic about her long-term prognosis. Alexander was present when Emma received this good news, and he was moved by the joy and relief on both siblings' faces. James had tears in his eyes as he hugged his sister gently, careful not to disturb the medical equipment that was still monitoring her progress. "We are not out of the woods yet," Emma said with a weak but genuine smile. "But for the first time in 2 years, I feel like I might actually get to grow up and become that teacher I have always wanted to be." Alexander realized that Emma's comment about becoming a teacher had given him an idea for how he might use his experience with their situation to help other people facing similar challenges. He began researching charitable organizations that provided support for families dealing with serious medical emergencies. What Alexander discovered was that many families faced the same impossible choice that James had confronted. Parents often had to choose between keeping their jobs and caring for seriously ill children. Many families went into debt or lost their homes because of medical expenses combined with lost income from taking time off work. Alexander proposed to his father that the royal family establish a charitable foundation specifically focused on providing emergency financial assistance and job placement services for families facing medical crises. King Edward was impressed by his son's continued commitment to addressing the broader issues that James and Emma's situation had revealed. "You have shown me that individual acts of Compassion can inspire systemic changes that help many people, King Edward told his son. I approve of your proposal for the Medical Emergency Assistance Foundation. Alexander threw himself into planning the new foundation with the same dedication he had shown in helping James and Emma. He worked with financial advisors, legal experts, and medical professionals to create a comprehensive support system for families in crisis. The foundation would provide temporary financial assistance to help families maintain their basic living expenses during medical emergencies. It would also work with employers to advocate for flexible leave policies and would help people find new employment if they lost their jobs due to medical situations. As James's medical leave period neared its end, Alexander made sure that his transition back to work would be smooth and supportive. Captain Williams assured Alexander that James's position was secure and that his colleagues had been looking forward to his return. Alexander also arranged for Emma to have ongoing support during her recovery period. The palace medical officer, Dr. Chen, agreed to monitor Emma's progress and coordinate with her hospital treatment team to ensure she received the best possible continuing care. On James's first day back at work, Alexander made a point of visiting him at his guard post. James looked healthier and more relaxed than he had in months, and his gratitude toward Alexander remained overwhelming. Your Highness, James said, I want you to know that what you did for my family has changed our entire lives. Emma is getting stronger every day, and I have been able to focus completely on supporting her recovery without worrying about our financial survival. Alexander was pleased to hear this positive report, but he was even more interested in James's perspective on the broader policy changes. James, do you think the new medical emergency leave policy will really help other employees who face similar situations? James nodded emphatically. Absolutely. I have already spoken with several other guards who have told me about family members with chronic illnesses or elderly parents who need care. Knowing that they can take time off for genuine emergencies without losing their jobs gives them tremendous peace of mind. Alexander realized that James's feedback confirmed what he had hoped to achieve through the policy reform. By addressing one person's specific need, they had created a system that would help many others facing similar challenges. As Alexander walked through the palace corridors that evening, he reflected on how much his life had changed since that morning, when he first encountered James in distress. What had started as a chance encounter had evolved into a meaningful mission that had taught him about leadership, compassion, and the power of individual action to create positive change. 6 months after Emma's bone marrow transplant, Alexander received the news he had been hoping for. Emma's doctors declared that her treatment had been completely successful, and she was officially in remission. Her blood counts were normal, her energy was returning, and she was strong enough to begin planning her return to school. Alexander arranged to visit Emma on the day she was finally discharged from the hospital. When he arrived, he found her sitting up in bed looking more vibrant and healthy than he had ever seen her. James was beside her, beaming with joy and relief as they prepared to go home together. Prince Alexander, Emma exclaimed when she saw him enter the room. Look at me. The doctors say I am going to be completely healthy. I can go back to school next month and start catching up on everything I missed. Alexander felt a deep sense of satisfaction and happiness as he looked at Emma's bright, hopeful face. The frail, weak girl he had first met had been transformed into an energetic teenager full of plans and dreams for the future. Emma, you look wonderful, Alexander said sincerely. I am so proud of how bravely you handled all of the treatment. And James, you should be proud of yourself too. Your courage and sacrifice made Emma's recovery possible. James shook his head modestly. Your Highness, none of this would have been possible without your intervention. When I think about where we might be today if you had not stopped to help us, I realize that you literally saved both of our lives. Alexander was touched by James's gratitude, but he had come to understand that the experience had been equally meaningful for him.
James, you and Emma taught me something very important about what it means to use my position as a prince responsibly.
You showed me that real leadership means caring about individual people and their struggles. Emma had been listening to this conversation with growing excitement. Prince Alexander, I have something to tell you. I have decided what I want to study when I go to university. I want to become a pediatric social worker. so I can help other children who are facing serious illnesses and their families who need support. Alexander was amazed by Emma's decision to dedicate her future career to helping others who face challenges similar to what she had experienced. Emma, that is a wonderful choice. Your personal experience will help you understand and support other families in ways that few people could. And I have been thinking about this too, James added. I want to use my experience to help other palace employees who might face similar situations. Captain Williams has asked me to serve as a liaison for the new medical emergency leave policy, to help other staff members understand their options and navigate the process. Alexander was delighted to hear that both siblings wanted to use their experience to help others. Their commitment to service and support reminded him of the values his father had always tried to teach him about royal responsibility. The medical emergency assistance foundation that Alexander had established was now fully operational and had already helped dozens of families facing medical crises. The foundation provided not only financial support, but also advocacy services to help families work with their employers and navigate complex medical and insurance systems. Alexander had also expanded his role within the palace administration. His father had appointed him to chair a new employee welfare committee that regularly reviewed palace policies to ensure they were fair and supportive of staff members' needs. Alexander took this responsibility seriously, knowing that good policies could prevent other families from facing the kind of crisis that James and Emma had endured. On Emma's last day in the hospital, she presented Alexander with a handwritten letter that she had been working on during her recovery. The letter thanked him not just for helping her family, but for showing her that people in positions of power could choose to use their influence to help others. I wrote this letter, Emma explained, because I want you to know that your kindness changed how I think about leadership and responsibility. When I become a social worker, I will always remember that even small acts of compassion can have enormous impact on people's lives. Alexander read Emma's letter with growing emotion. Her thoughtful words reminded him that the most important measure of his success as a prince would not be the formal ceremonies he attended or the official duties he performed, but the positive difference he made in individual people's lives. As Alexander prepared to leave the hospital for the final time, Emma asked him one last question. Prince Alexander, will you come to my graduation when I finish my social work degree? I want you to see that your kindness helped create someone who will spend her life helping others. Alexander smiled warmly at Emma's invitation. Emma, I would be honored to attend your graduation, and I will be proud to see how you use your strength and compassion to help other families. Walking back to the palace that evening, Alexander reflected on how much he had learned from James and Emma's courage and determination. What had begun as a chance encounter in a palace corridor had evolved into a life-changing experience that had taught him about true leadership, genuine compassion, and the power of individual action to create positive change. Alexander knew that his encounter with James and Emma would influence every decision he made as he grew into his role as a future king. He had learned that the most important quality a leader could possess was the willingness to listen to others' struggles and the courage to take action to help solve them. Years later, when Alexander became king, he would be known for his progressive policies supporting working families and his personal involvement in charitable causes. But he would always remember that his understanding of compassionate leadership began with a young guard's tears in a palace corridor and a 14-year-old girl's determination to survive and help others. The royal guard James Morrison became one of the most respected members of the palace security team and eventually rose to become an assistant to Captain Williams. Emma graduated with honors from university and became a beloved pediatric social worker, helping countless families navigate medical crises with the same strength and hope that had carried her through her own recovery. Their story became a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the belief that every person's struggle matters, regardless of their position in life.